Have you ever gone no contact with someone and found yourself obsessively wondering what they're thinking? Asking yourself, do they even notice I'm gone? Are they relieved? Are they secretly hoping I'll reach out? If those questions have been looping in your head, you're not alone. When you've been emotionally invested in someone who leans avoidant, silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like punishment. You expected distance to bring you clarity, maybe even healing, but instead it left you with 1,000 unanswered questions. I'm Jim Rohn, and in this video we're going to talk about what avoidants actually hope for when you go no contact. Not from guesswork or speculation, but from a grounded understanding of how avoidant attachment works. Because here's the truth, just because avoidants pull away doesn't mean they stop feeling. And just because they aren't chasing you doesn't mean they don't notice your absence. But what they hope for when you step back may be very different from what your anxious mind wants to believe. This video is for you if you've been stuck in the spiral, if you've found yourself analyzing the silence, second-guessing your decision or questioning your worth in the wake of their distance. We're going to unpack the truth behind their patterns and what your space is really doing to the dynamic. And no, this isn't about how to win them back. This is about understanding the deeper emotional undercurrent so you can stop overfunctioning, stop blaming yourself, and start reclaiming your power. So if you're ready to get some real clarity and maybe even a little peace, make sure you hit that subscribe button and stick with me through this video, because this just might be the shift that finally helps you break the cycle and choose yourself fully. Let's dive in. One of the biggest things to understand about someone with avoidant tendencies is that deep down, they often assume you'll still be there when they're ready to come back. It's not necessarily something they say out loud, but it's a quiet belief that shapes their behavior. When they pull away, whether emotionally or physically, there's usually an unspoken expectation that you'll wait, that you'll stay emotionally available no matter how long they need. Why? Because in the past, you probably did everything you could to hold the relationship together. You gave them grace. You showed up with love, patience, and effort. And while you meant that as a genuine act of commitment, many avoidant partners interpret that not as connection, but as a kind of emotional safety net. Proof that they can come and go without real consequence. Instead of feeling inspired to lean in and meet you emotionally, they grow more comfortable maintaining distance, confident that you'll be waiting in the wings. But that's not how secure mutual love works. The moment you truly pull back, not as a game, but from a place of clarity and self-respect, is the moment they're forced to face the reality that they could actually lose you. That's when things get real. That's when the illusion of endless chances falls apart and they're left to reflect on what they've taken for granted. For many avoidants, this is the turning point. It creates a healthy kind of pressure, not to manipulate, but to wake them up to the truth that connection isn't something they can keep putting off. When you're no longer available on demand, they may for the first time begin to take accountability, to see your worth, and maybe even step toward growth. But that only happens when you stop proving yourself and start choosing yourself. So when you go no contact, remember this: what they expect is your patience. But what they need, if they're ever going to grow, is your absence. Another truth that often goes unspoken is that avoidant partners secretly hope you'll be the one to break the silence first. Not because they're ready to repair things, but because it spares them the emotional risk of having to initiate contact. Reaching out requires vulnerability, something avoidants often struggle with. They may not want to be the one to say, "I miss you," or "Can we talk?" because doing so would force them to acknowledge their feelings, and that level of emotional exposure can feel deeply uncomfortable for them. But if you reach out, they get to bypass all of that. You taking the first step sends them a subtle signal that you're still emotionally available, that the door is still open, and that they don't have to face the discomfort of not knowing where they stand with you. It soothes their internal anxiety without requiring them to be emotionally honest or accountable. And in many cases, it allows them to slip right back into the dynamic without ever having to address what went wrong or how it impacted you. So when they don't hear from you, especially after you've always been the one to re-establish contact, it can quietly challenge the script they've come to rely on. Your silence holds weight. It forces them to sit with the possibility that maybe you aren't waiting this time, that maybe you're actually creating space not out of punishment, but out of self-respect. And in that space, they might finally begin to realize they don't just miss the comfort of you reaching out, they might actually miss you. But that realization only comes when you hold the line and give them the chance to feel your absence, not your availability. Another hidden dynamic you need to understand about avoidant partners is that many of them quietly hope that time alone will fix everything. Not effort, not conversations, not growth, just distance. There's this underlying belief that if enough days or weeks go by, the tension will dissolve on its own, and they'll be able to reconnect with you without ever addressing the hard stuff. In their mind, time works like a reset button, and because they often find emotional discomfort overwhelming, especially when it involves being vulnerable or working through conflict, the idea of letting things cool off feels much more manageable than actually showing up to repair what's broken. They want to skip the messiness, the emotional accountability, the difficult truths. Instead, they hope you'll do what you've done before. Make the first move, smooth things over, and reassure them that everything is okay without requiring them to face any emotional weight. They see time as their buffer, a way to let things fade rather than resolve. But here's the truth. Time doesn't heal what's never been faced. Unspoken hurt doesn't vanish just because the clock moves forward. And relationships don't magically repair themselves without two people consciously choosing to show up differently. If they come back after time apart and try to slide back into connection without addressing anything real, it's not healing, it's avoidance dressed up as comfort. And if you meet them there without naming what's been unresolved, you risk re-entering a dynamic that hasn't actually evolved. That's why it's so important that you don't mistake silence for peace, and it's also why they so often resist reaching out first, because to do so might mean having to acknowledge the emotional distance they helped create. They'd rather you initiate, not just so they can avoid discomfort, but because if you break the silence, it gives them a sense of reassurance. Maybe everything's fine. Maybe I don't have to change after all. But deep, lasting love requires more than just waiting for things to settle. It requires presence, honesty, and the willingness to grow. And that starts with not stepping in to make things easier for someone who hasn't shown they're ready to meet you there. Another common pattern with avoidant individuals, and one that's often invisible unless you know what to look for, is that they secretly hope you'll miss them without them ever having to say they miss you. It's subtle, but it's powerful. They want to feel wanted, desired, remembered, but without having to make the first move or take the emotional risk of expressing those feelings themselves. They're hoping you'll be the one to reach out and say, "I miss you," because that gives them confirmation that the emotional door is still open without them having to do the vulnerable work of walking through it first. And for someone with an avoidant attachment style, vulnerability feels dangerous, not because they don't care, but because they were likely never taught how to safely hold or express deep emotions. So instead of saying how they feel, they wait. And if you're the one to bridge the silence, they'll often mirror back a surface-level response like, "Yeah, I miss you too." Not because they're being dishonest, but because they don't quite know how to access or express the depth behind it. What they're really hoping is that your message will give them emotional safety without requiring emotional effort. But here's the thing. When you go no contact, especially when you do it in a real grounded way, by blocking or unfollowing, by choosing silence not out of spite but out of self-respect, it disrupts that silent hope. It sends a clear signal that you're no longer participating in a dynamic that asks you to do all the emotional lifting. It forces them to face a reality they've often avoided, that maybe this time you won't be waiting. And that can shake something in them. Avoidants are incredibly perceptive when it comes to energy shifts. If you've always been available and suddenly you're not, it breaks the pattern they've relied on. That's when they often try to pull you back in through small messages, vague check-ins, or seemingly innocent attempts to re-establish connection. But more often than not, these aren't true attempts to repair. They're attempts to reset, to go back to the old dynamic where you were the one trying and they were the one resisting. This is why your consistency in holding no contact matters so much, because the moment you fold, especially when they haven't shown up differently, you reinforce the pattern. You tell them, yes, you can keep being emotionally unavailable, and I'll keep doing the work for both of us. That's not love. That's self-abandonment. And I'm not saying avoidance can't grow. They absolutely can. But the hard truth is that growth rarely happens inside the relationship when the avoidant hasn't yet felt the real cost of losing it. They often need distance to see the impact of their patterns. And you need that same distance to step out of the emotional fog, to get honest about how much of yourself you were shrinking to keep the connection alive. Because once you've been out of it long enough, you may begin to see things more clearly, not through the lens of longing, but through the lens of truth. You might realize the relationship was hurting more than it was healing, that your love was real, but the container couldn't hold it. And from that clarity, you'll begin to rebuild, not to win them back, but to come back home to yourself. And that's when you open the door to a whole new kind of relationship, one where love doesn't feel like a chase, one where you don't have to earn someone's presence, one where you're chosen fully just by being exactly who you are. And that's what you deserve. Not someone who moves toward you only when you step away, but someone who stays, who grows, and who shows up every time. If there's one thing I hope this video leaves you with, it's this. Your value is not determined by someone else's ability to recognize it, nor should it hinge on whether they decide to come back. What avoidants often hope for when you go no contact is comfort without effort, connection without accountability, and your availability without the vulnerability that real intimacy requires. But that is not what love is supposed to look like, and it's certainly not what you were built for. You were not made to wait in silence, hoping to be remembered. You were made to be chosen, seen, and loved for who you are, consistently and completely. Throughout this video, we explored how avoidant partners may silently hope you'll reach out first, that time will magically repair the damage, or that they'll feel wanted without ever having to admit they miss you. But these patterns aren't just about them. They reveal something deeper, the emotional loop you may have found yourself stuck in. The need to prove you're worth loving, to chase down reassurance, to hold space for someone who struggles to hold it for you. And the truth is, you deserve better than that. You deserve to feel safe in love, not triggered by it. The greatest shift you can make is choosing to step out of that cycle by going no contact, not out of anger, but from a place of self-respect. You're not punishing them, you're protecting yourself. You're creating space to see clearly, to heal, and to come home to your own emotional clarity. And in doing so, you're giving them the only thing that may ever truly wake them up: the risk of losing something real. Thank you so much for watching this video. If any part of it resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share where you are in your journey. Whether you're freshly out of a breakup or just trying to make sense of a confusing connection, your voice matters here. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I share content like this every week to help you reconnect with your worth, break out of toxic patterns, and build relationships rooted in real emotional safety. You are not too much. You're not too sensitive. You're not hard to love. You were just showing up fully in a space that wasn't equipped to meet you. But now, you get to write a new story. One where you're no longer waiting to be chosen. You choose yourself. And that's where everything changes. I'll see you in the next one.